imagination simply contained in the mind, or does it tap into an unseen world with messages waiting to be told? There is a place where legends cross over into our world, where strange visions and whispers beckon, and superstition takes hold. Step into the Black Cat's shadow.
Welcome back to the Black Cat's Shadow. Join us as we take a closer look at the cases of the strange and unexplained from all over the world, and how they inspire some of our favorite horror movies. My name is Andy, and I am your host today, podcasting from Kansas City, Missouri. And today we have a special interview episode. We have a special guest from all the way from England. We have a musician and filmmaker named John. How's it going today, John?
It's going very well. Thank you very much for having me over.
I'm really excited to have you on here because I recently saw your film that you made called the Doxey Boggart on YouTube, because you had graciously sent me the link to it. So I went ahead and checked it out, and I was really fascinated by it. I mean, I really enjoyed the movie.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, so I wanted to get you on and give you a chance to tell our listeners about it, and about some of your other projects that you have, because you are a musician as well.
So it's claimed, yeah.
Well, I'm a musician too, and it's hard to I don't know, anymore. It seems like it's more of a bedroom hobby than anything, but it's fun.
That's exactly where I'm sitting at the moment. Is what used to be the largest bedroom in the house. And I said, no, I'm not having that. Get rid of the bedroom furniture. Now it's my studio. So the largest room in the house isn't given over to sleeping; it's given over to making a racket. So that's the way it rolls. I've got a whole sort of studio set up here, full of so much clutter, it's dangerous.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love getting a sneak peek into people's studios and just finding out what instruments they have there and what they use for recording their music.
That would be a mystery tour. One of the things about me is I make my own instruments. So yeah, there's a few traditional guitars and synths and whatnot around here, but most of what's in here is circuit bent toys, boxes with springs and coils sticking out the top of them. All sorts, speakers with the cones smashed in and things taped to them. So it's a real, it is dangerous. There's things that are sticking out the wall and hanging all over the place. Considering I'm a blind guy, I can't see an awful lot. I basically go around by touch and hope that I don't knock things over every time I come in here. But that's the way I like it. I wouldn't have it any other way, because there's always something within hand's reach which has got knobs or dials or things like that on it. So if I ever need some sonic inspiration, all I do is just reach out and grab the nearest thing.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that here in a little bit, about your music. But first, let's talk about the Doxey Boggart, your film. Can you tell the listeners a little about the plot of your film, what it's about?
Yeah, it's, I would say, loose plot, because it started as a bit of an experiment, and always had a fascination with folklore, especially local folklore, creatures and things that might go bump in the night, tales that have been passed down, through families and whatnot. And on the outskirts of the town that I live on, there is a place called Doxey and Doxey Marshes, which is it's an incredibly atmospheric little place for somewhere that's so close to a town. And it always struck me that if there was a folklore monster in Stafford, which is my hometown, that's where it would live. It's a very old place. It's got a couple of really interesting stories attached to it. So I started off from that premise and tried to approach it more like a sound art project, really. Weave in some elements of folklore. The film talks a lot about local history, and all of that is... I didn't make any of that up. That all exists in local books and whatnot. So I just incorporated that with the theory of tulpa or thought forms, which is a case of if enough people believe in something, it probably comes to life in some form. And that's something that's built heavily into the film, that through ritual and belief, something can come into existence. And that's the premise for the film. And over the course of the film, we go out and we do some ritual sort of sound experiments, and we recant a local folk tale. And it's then left up to the imagination as to whether you believe that we've called something into being. Boggart. I don't know whether are you familiar with the term Boggart?
Not really, but I was kind of looking it up. I looked it up, and it looks like that's where our term boogeyman comes from.
Yeah. It all goes back to bugs and shucks and bogies and whatnot. I think it's just a general term that's given to something that's not very nice, that is not of this world. Boggart, if there's any Harry Potter fans out there, I'm not one. I have to say, it's not something that you'll find on my DVD shelf. Yeah. But yeah, one of the creatures in Harry Potter is a Boggart. So I think it's a very British thing. It's a very British folk tale, often associated with marshes and whatnot. And it just seems to make sense that if there was a creature living out there, it could very well be a Boggart. And there are a number of Boggart folk tales that relate to the locality in the same shire, if you like, sounding very much like a Middle Earth there. But, so that's why we chose the Boggart as the beast in question. And who knows, it might actually exist now.
No, that's one of the things that really drew me to this film was the it kind of revolved around this folklore, and that's something that we like to talk about a lot, urban legends and folklore on this podcast, and how they influence art, specifically movies, but then I could see how they could influence music as well. That was a really cool facet to this film. So you have a fascination with the local legends of your town, and that inspired you to make this film, and also you incorporated your music into it as well. Is that right?
Yeah. That was very much the starting point. It's something that I get up to quite a lot anyway. In terms of a lot of my instruments are quite portable; they can run off battery power. So I'm always scratching my head thinking of where's a really interesting place to try and sort of capture some energy and capture a vibe. So I've performed in some quite unusual and interesting spaces. I did a performance on the edge of a lake which is called Mermaid's Pool. And literally that was, again, if I can sort of summon up some dark musical energies, is there a chance that the mermaid might stir and come and get me? She didn't, and so I was around to carry on making music and film, but that sort of thing's always appealed to me, so that was very much the starting point. Now, about it is coming up to a year ago now. I play guitar a lot. I'm in a couple of bands and I play guitar. And about a year ago, I was doing a gig at a festival, and I happened to break my shoulder quite badly. Wow. And it meant that I couldn't do a lot of the things that would normally occupy my time with. I couldn't solder because it was my right arm that I broke. I couldn't get a guitar over my shoulder or under my arm, so it kind of put me out of action in terms of what would normally keep me busy. And I'm not one to be lazy, so I just thought, okay, what else can I do? And I thought, I've got an idea. So it was one thing led to another. So yes, breaking my shoulder was a bad thing, but it led to sort of new ideas and new ways to keep myself busy, and the film is the result of that.
It's interesting. Like, I think there in England, you guys have such a lot more history and interesting history than I feel like sometimes we have here in America. And you even have places called Mermaid's Pond and things like that, and you have these like really interesting locations and and things, you know, and I would love to go over there sometime and just explore. I think that would be amazing. But yeah, definitely like a lot of those locations over there, you know, you have castles and things like that. And I think a lot of those types of places could definitely lend itself to like an eerie atmosphere, or, you know, just lend itself to like, you know, creating darker forms of art. So that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, me too. I mean, the patch of England that I live in has been extensively industrialized and agriculture and whatnot. So a lot of the really old history, a lot of the Neolithic standing stones and circles that would have been here have all been stripped away over time. But we've still got our castles, and we've still got. I think there's a whole lot of folklore associated with sort of industrial and post-industrial eras. So you've got more sort of recent ghost tales and sort of recent tragedies that have given rise to superstitions and whatnot. So, yeah, you're right, and that's one of the things I most like about living here. Personally, I really fancy the idea of living in America. So perhaps you ought to arrange a swap at some point.
Yeah, well, yeah, and right now, like on our podcast, we are doing a series that's called The Road Trip of Horror. And so what we're doing is we're going from state to state, not literally, but, you know, virtually. And so each episode is we focus on a different state, and we look at the urban legends and folk tales from each state and tell people about them. And then we look at a movie that was based on one of those tales or something. So it's definitely interesting. It's opened my eyes to the things that we have here in the United States, like the urban legends and folk tales that we have here. It's been fascinating.
That does sound interesting. Yeah, you'll have to remind me to tune into your podcast, and I'll check it out for myself.
All right, thanks. Something I was thinking about was, you know, and while, you know, making a film sounds very fun, and there's all these romantic notions about being a filmmaker, but what are some of the challenges that you faced while making this film?
Pretty much the fact that I had never done it before. I've made some music videos, and I've set up like GoPros and little cameras to record some of the improvised sets that I've done here and there, but I've never tried to get it to cohere into something that I would even think that anybody else would be interested in watching. So yeah, I mean, it was literally, how do I go about this? How good does my equipment need to be? And I really hadn't got a clue what I was doing, really. So I went out and I spent a couple of £100 on a camera that was capable of recording HD video. And went to sleep one night. Didn't sleep very well. Woke up out of a dream with pretty much exactly how I wanted to do this film, just fresh in my mind. So I quickly scribbled it down, and we went from there. Challenges-wise, there was no script. Everything that's in the film is a natural conversation that wasn't rehearsed in any way. So there was no rehearsals. I didn't audition for any cast members. The people who are in the film are people who are involved in my life from a day-to-day business, and they know exactly the kind of thing that I like to get up to. So as soon as I mention I've got a project, I've normally got a bunch of people saying, can I get involved? Can I come along? So yeah, all the people in the film are very much those kind of people. They're just people I rope in, and they're all just like willing to have a camera pointed at them, and I press record. And as you probably gathered, I can talk as well. So you're leading the conversation here, but I'm quite happy just sort of waffling on and having a discussion about interesting things. And that is, you know, a lot of what the film is. There was never any repeat filming. There was never any, oh, that didn't work, let's do it again. I wanted it to be a very natural progression. I didn't want it to come across as fake in any way, at least in terms of what we were saying and what we were experiencing and whatnot. So, yeah, it wasn't particularly challenging. The challenge, I guess, was probably the weather and being blind. I can't drive, so when you carry musical equipment about, you really do just have to get buses and public transport and carry the lot on your back. A couple of miles out into the marshes and whatnot. And I guess rather than it being a challenge, it's just something that we've appreciated in hindsight, is filming in that way. You know, what you get is what you get. And if you're to go back and realize that the sound perhaps wasn't as good as you wanted, you can't quite hear every aspect of the conversation. You know, the temptation is to go back out and rerun it. But I just feel that would have lost the very natural, conversational bunch of mates doing something vibe about the film, which is why it's rough and ready. And I guess it suited the purpose. It's probably a very easy first film to make because it was just a series of conversations in locations that I was familiar with, doing things that I'm comfortable doing in terms of the music and the folklore and whatnot. So it's just literally the time and the effort, and it's been a labour of love. I've really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah, and that's one of the thing that I noticed was the conversation, the dialogue in this film. It felt so natural, so I was wondering if there was a script or not, and I could see it just being a conversation amongst friends, and I think that really helps the film. Because I think some of the films that actually have writers and writer script, they're not as good as the dialogue in your film, because your dialogue is a lot more natural and it just flows and it feels like you're watching something real. It doesn't feel like a movie. So I think you made a good choice there in just having those natural conversations in place.
Yeah, thank you. The one thing that really surprised me is I had I'm not confident in this. You might have picked this up. This is the first time I've done it. And when I said, okay, it's done, I was like, shall I actually show this to anybody else, or shall I just put it in a drawer and forget about it?
Right.
But there's too much work and too much help from other people for me to just say, okay, done that, put it aside, what's my next thing? So I arranged an intimate screening where probably sort of 25, 30 of those nearest and dearest came along, and it surprised me that there was kind of outbursts of laughter at some points, and it's kind of, there's some funny bits in there. It's kind of, I just realised that the banter that because we take the mickey out of each other a bit throughout the film, and there's just nudges and prods, and people really sort of picked up on that sort of natural humour, which is, again, it's just inadvertent, really, totally unplanned.
Sure,
but I'm quite happy that it happened that way.
Yeah, there was some scenes that made me chuckle. I'm glad that you had a little bit of, the levity in there.
Yeah, mostly supplied by my guide dog, JJ, because he just has a habit of cropping up at the most, inopportune times. So we'll just insert a bark, and I think on the there's three rituals, if you like, throughout the course of the film, and on before filming the last ritual, where we're really worried that we might have stirred some dark forces, we're talking about it, and JJ's the name of my guide dog, by the way. He is seriously disturbed by something, and there's nobody there but us. It's quite a desolate place in the winter. Nobody really goes there if they don't have to, and something set him growling, and something set him off, and I couldn't have asked for it to be timed better.
No, yeah,
it just added a little something.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember that scene, and so I was wondering, in that scene, somebody said, "Oh, there's people coming," or something like that.
Nobody turned up.
Yeah. No, that was a nice touch, though. I mean, good job, JJ.
Happy accidents. There was a lot of those in the film, really.
Well, and I think when you're filming, sometimes that happens, and there's a lot of things you don't plan for when you're doing a project like that.
Well, musically, it's one of my rules as well. I wouldn't ever venture to call myself an accomplished musician. I can just pick up most things and get some sort of a tune out of it. And if I'm playing something and I do something which is decidedly off key, or decidedly discordant, or decidedly arrhythmic, then I just repeat it a few times, and people think you're doing it on purpose. Yeah. No, I can relate, definitely. So the musical piece that was kind of front and center in the film, was that something that you just made on the fly, or was that something that you had created before? What, the rituals? The folk tale poems, I have to admit, were penned by myself. So we alluded to I don't want to, I won't spoil too much, but the Boggart tales in the area are there to be investigated. You can find them in the history books, you can find them on the internet, but the wording I used throughout the film in relation to the Boggart, I kind of elaborated the tales myself. Especially the third one, which is where we decide that we've got to perhaps undo something that we've done. That was something I wrote based on an alternative view of a Boggart not being a completely nasty son of a bitch, but occasionally being more benevolent. So yeah, that was the words. The music, largely, totally improvised. I know what the various devices I took out are capable of doing, so I knew kind of vaguely what it was going to sound like. But yeah, just totally made up as I go along. That's the way I roll.
Yeah, no, and it was fascinating to see that side of the film. Well, especially a musician, and I'm not super familiar with like ambient type music and how it's made. So I thought that was very fascinating to see how you actually made that music. And so that's something I also wanted to touch on was, your dark ambient experimental music. Can you like share with the listeners that may not be familiar with that style, like kind of what dark ambient music is?
It's pushing the boundaries of what you can define as music. It's more atmosphere and a way of creating an emotion and an energy, really. So it may well only have one note. It may be a drone, which will then have, other sort of fractal, skeletal sounds drifting in and out. So it's more, I think, about musical tone and ambience, and the dark obviously comes from the fact that it is music for nighttime listening, I guess, and probably suits anybody who likes sort of horror films and whatnot. Inherently, a lot of what is in the score for a horror film typically could be classed as dark ambient. And some key dark ambient musicians have scored films. The likes of Lusmord, who I think is credited with inventing the dark ambient genre. He's worked on plenty of film soundtracks, and even going back to the early days of industrial music, the likes of Throbbing Gristle and Coil and bands like that. They've gone on to be heavily involved in scoring movies as well. So I think there is definitely a crossover in terms of evoking an atmosphere, but evoking it in a minimal way. Whereas there's not too much structure there, and it's all about just building that tension and that atmosphere.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I picked up too. Is it's kind of creating this soundscape, and you're creating this, like you said, you're creating a feeling, or so it is more like you call it sound art. That's really what it is. It's a little bit more abstract. It doesn't have structure like a traditional song, but it's very interesting, and if you think of it more like a movie score, then maybe people could relate to it a little bit better. But I like I said, I enjoyed watching the process of creating the music, and I was interested in like the types of instruments that you use to make your music. I noticed like there's parts where you're like waving things, spinning things around in the air.
Yeah, that was a conscious effort in terms of it, rather than it being all electronic. Is if we had some physical instruments there as well, you're almost catching more elemental forces, So there was two instruments. One is an Australian bull roarer, which is it's a shaped fluted piece of wood on the end of a string, and when you wave it around, it just creates a rhythmic drone. And the other is something called a wind wand, which I did actually get from a chap who makes them in America, which is a piece of elastic that's stretched over a framework, and again you can rotate that, and literally the wind, the air passing through the elastic creates another quite ominous drone. You can actually tune it as well with the different bands and by changing the dimensions of the frame. So yeah, there's two physical instruments there, and the rest of them were sort of DIY, modified, homemade noise boxes, really, just oscillators that create drones that you can tune, put through effects and whatnot. Yeah, I've got too many of those to mention. Really, that's my love. Really, I'm a traditional musician as well. I play in rock bands, but I just love the drone.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting look into that world, into your world, basically. So here's a question. So have you ever seen a Boggart?
I've never seen a Boggart. I'm not sure what anybody knows what a Boggart looks like. If you take the Harry Potter version of a Boggart, I think they're meant to be a small sort of browny fairy folk. So they're probably quite small and sprite-like, almost like a gremlin, I guess, that just hangs around and causes mischief. In my mind, I had it as akin to some other folklore in this area. There's a creature called the man monkey or the shug monkey, which is kind of, I guess, Sasquatch, really, that sort of a smaller English version of that wild man type thing that's perhaps got a supernatural leaning. So I'd got this sort of hunkered down, dishevelled, hairy, glowing-eyed creature in my mind. That's what I pictured the Boggart to look like. And luckily I've got some quite clever artistic friends who sort of carved me some block printing impressions of what I think the Boggart would look like, and we've used that to sort of hand stamp the outer package of the artwork for the DVD and CDs that have tried to coerce people into buying. So yeah, that's my vision of what the Boggart is, but I can't claim to have seen one, I'm afraid.
Okay, so you have the DVD for sale, and the DVD also comes with a 2-disc set of the soundtrack. Is that right?
That's correct. I've got a very small, a micro label, if you like, which initially specialised in cassettes, just with the resurgence of the cassette format. And the ethos of the label is that everything is hand packaged, everything is hand printed. There's no sending off to the printers and getting shiny, glossy type covers. We wanted something unique about everything that we put out. So the first cassette we released actually used toilet roll inner tubes. If you squash those down, they're exactly the right size for a cassette to slide in.
Oh wow!
That's DIY at its most basic level. So yeah, the packaging was always important, and I just scouted around for sort of recycled card materials and envelopes, and sort of developed it from there. But you're right, yeah, there's a double CD in there, and this probably harks back to the conversation we were having a little earlier on in terms of dark ambient, and film scores can often be written by sort of dark ambient musicians. And I approached this one the other way round, so the only 3 pieces of music that I'm directly responsible for are the rituals that you see me perform during the course of the movie. There's a heck of a lot of other music in there, which I've actually culled from my sort of collection of associates and musical friends, if you like. So I basically did a shout out as to who would like to be involved in such a project, and really pleased with the response that came forward, and the caliber of some of the acts that volunteered their services too. So the CD is generally full of other people's music, which I've made fit the film and tried to choose the tone and the menace and the darkness of the music to fit all the interlude pieces that we used. So yeah, thrilled just to have so many friends and so many quality artists who are saying, yeah, we'll be involved, you can have our music, you can use it for free, and absolutely thrilled with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, you mentioned your record label, and tell me the name of it again.
Sonic Entrails.
Okay.
That's got a bit of a horror bent to it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the logo is a cassette shell with sort of very black and red tentacles dripping out. So instead of spools of tape falling out the bottom of the cassette, it's tentacles instead. So a bit of a Lovecraftian spin on it there, maybe.
Oh man, I love that. Yeah, I'm a big Lovecraft person. We just finished up an episode talking about Lovecraft. That's awesome. And that is a thing. Like right now, like there's a resurgence in the cassette tapes, and it's surprising, but and I'm curious to like kind of, what the reasoning is behind that. Is it just maybe more for nostalgia, or what do you think it is?
I think it is nostalgia, but I think there are one or two things about cassettes that perhaps lend themselves to having that little bit of longevity. And have you ever been to a gig and you said, well, I want to take some music home. It's hot. I've just come in my jeans and a T-shirt. All I've got is a pocket. And then you try to fit a CD in the pocket, and the CD's not going to go in the pocket. If you buy vinyl, you've got to carry it. If you buy a cassette, it just slips nicely in your pocket. So there's that advantage.
Okay.
And in this day and age, when you're giving download codes away with anything that isn't a CD, it just means that it's a nice physical object, and it does fit in the pocket. And if you want the music on your computer or your iPod, MP3 player, whatever, you've got the download code for that. So it removes the limitation of that format. You don't have to have that portable cassette player. You don't have to have your hi-fi set up all the time to listen to cassettes. You can own a physical item with artwork and writing and interesting packaging, and it can have the digital as well. So I think that's there. And cassette never really died as a creative tool either. There's still a lot of artists out there that use cassette loops to build sort of ambience and soundscapes, whereas they've just hacked apart the cassettes, and rather than it being a 60-minute runtime, it's just a few second loop of cassette held together, and just build up a collection of different sounds that you can just swap and change and whatnot. And that never stopped really. There's always a few artists out there, so maybe the two combined, and that's why there's been a little bit of a resurgence.
Oh wow, okay, that's fascinating.
I could tell you some ideas as to what I'm doing next, because I think I've got the bug, and I've now got 3 or 4 projects lined up. I'm only going to do one at a time. I'm going to be realistic, but we got a project lined up for the autumn and into the winter. There's an area near where I live called Cannock Chase, which is a big forested area, so a national forest. And if you do any reading about paranormal events and activities, UFO sightings, werewolf sightings, you will always hear mention of Cannock Chase. So I'm very fortunate to live quite close, within 20 miles of this place, it's a hotbed of paranormal activity. So I'm going to film a documentary which sort of encompasses all of the different paranormal events and occurrences that happen out there. You'll find there's been documentaries made about UFO sightings. There's been a documentary made about a werewolf myth that's out there. We've got ghostly girls that appear on the highways, and hitchhikers will pick them up and then they disappear. So there's little bits and bobs out there, but that nobody's tried to bring it all together. So I've got a project which I'm going to film in a very similar way to the Doxey Boggart, and I'm going to take real people who've seen things out onto Cannock Chase and ask them to take me to where they saw whatever they saw and tell me about those experiences, and just link it together with some beautiful footage of what is an amazing place. It lends itself to what I do, really. It just adds that sense of mystery. It gives me a chance to be playful again with the dark ambience and the sound tracking and whatnot. So that's probably the next thing I'm going to do.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that sounds great. I'm definitely looking forward to checking that out. I want to stay up to date on what you're doing, and let the listeners know how they can stay up to date on what you're doing. Do you have a website, or are you on Facebook or Twitter, things like that? Just share those links with the listeners here.
Yeah, in the real world, the handle that most people can find me by is John E. Smoke. So that's John with a John. E, the middle initial, Smoke. I basically nicked that from a Butthole Surfers song. Somebody gave me that nickname, so I'm kind of known by Mr. Smoke to a lot of people, even though it's not my real name. So yeah, you should be able to find me on Twitter and Facebook and various places like that. I made a bit of a mistake with this because I actually started a Twitter account and a Facebook account with the Doxey Boggart, not really having a feel for whether I would go on and do anything in that. So in hindsight, I probably should have set up a filmmaker's profile, and that's probably what I'll do. But at the moment, I can't claim that exists. So find me via either the music that I do or the DJing that I do, but it's normally Johnny Smoke, which will lead you to some of the bands I'm in. Key one is Flesh Eating Foundation, which is a sort of electro horror punk type band that's reasonably well known in some circles. And I'll work on getting a filmmaker's profile. I want to work out how to get on Internet Movie Database. I haven't got one of those profiles yet, despite being an extra in a few films and whatnot.
Oh, cool. Yeah. That would be great. John, I wanted to, I just want to thank you, once again for coming on the podcast and telling us about the projects you're working on. And, it's great to talk to you, and we'll have to have you on again here real soon.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope I haven't waffled on too much. And, really enjoyed speaking to you, and, look forward to sharing future projects with you as well.
So that'll wrap up our episode 29. And so remember, guys, to take a closer look at the world around you, and you may just find that it is stranger and more mysterious than you thought, especially in the Black Cat Shadow.